His screams tore through the London air like splintered bone through flesh. August 23, 1305. A man was dragged through the filthy streets on a wooden hurdle, his limbs shattered yet bound in chains. Onlookers jeered, some wept. His name was William Wallace. His crime? Defiance, freedom, treason in the eyes of England, and for that he would die not once, but in pieces, first flayed, then disemboweled, then quartered while still breathing. But before the blade ever touched his skin, they gouged out his soul with humiliation. They stuffed his mouth with rags, just to silence the cries. And yet, what they feared most was not his voice, it was his memory, his symbol, a man who dared to defy an empire. But why did England see so much threat in one warrior? And what led to such unspeakable vengeance? To understand Wallace's end, we must go back to where the fire first began. Scotland, 1297. The English flag cast its shadow over highlands and hearts alike. Lands were seized, sons vanished, daughters defiled, and from the ruins of silence rose a farmer's son, forged not in nobility but in rage. William Wallace was no king, no knight. He was a ghost of grief walking, his wife Marian publicly executed for resisting an English garrison. They made her a warning, but they made him a storm. With vengeance burning in his veins, Wallace struck at Lanark with wolves behind his eyes, slaughtering those responsible. This was no rebellion. It was personal, and it was only the beginning. As word of the attack spread like wildfire, thousands joined him, men who had lost brothers, fathers, wives. They didn't come for politics. They came for blood. Yet even as Wallace's army grew, so did England's fury. And behind the throne, a king sharpened his answer. Edward Longshanks, the Hammer of the Scots, was preparing his own kind of justice. Stirling Bridge, September 1297. Mist coiled low over the river like a warning, thick and watching. The English came heavy-footed, armored in arrogance. They thought Wallace would retreat. Instead, he waited, silent, predatory. As soon as the bridge choked with English cavalry, Wallace struck. Like lightning born of fury, his men surged forward, severing the bridge in blood and fire. English soldiers drowned in their armor, screeching beneath the weight of their own pride. It wasn't just a victory, it was a reckoning. For every Scottish village razed, for every cry unanswered, Wallace gave them a massacre. And from that moment, England no longer chased a rebel, they feared a legend. But legends, no matter how fierce, cast long shadows. And Wallace's shadow was watched by eyes colder than steel, waiting for their chance to extinguish the flame that had dared to rise from ruin. The year turned, and with it, hope began to wither. In 1298, at Falkirk, Wallace met the crushing tide of betrayal. Scottish lords bribed by English gold or broken by fear abandoned him. His lines fractured, his men slaughtered. Arrows blackened the sky like locusts, tearing through his army like parchment. Wallace survived, barely. But something inside him died that day. The crown turned its back on him. Once hailed as guardian of Scotland, now he was a hunted man, wandering the wilds that had once sung his name. For 7 long years, he became a ghost, striking silently, vanishing like mist. But the English were patient. They waited as rats wait for the lion to limp. In 1305, Wallace was betrayed, captured near Glasgow by a fellow Scot, bound in iron, dragged hundreds of miles to stand trial not as a soldier, but as a savage. They didn't want justice. They wanted a spectacle, and London would feast on his agony. Westminster Hall. A name that echoes with the laughter of kings and now, with the screams of a man they called Rebel. Before a jeering crowd, Wallace stood unbroken, unbowed, denying every charge except one. "I do not accept the charge of treason," he declared, "for I never swore allegiance to the English king." That silence afterward was not quiet, it trembled with fear. Here stood a man they could not shame, a prisoner whose spine outmatched an empire. They sentenced him to death by the full ritual of treason, a punishment so vile it was rarely spoken aloud. First, stripped naked, then, drawn behind a horse through streets slick with filth, then the knife, the fire, the hook, and finally, his body torn in 4, pieces sent to every corner of England as a warning, his head spiked atop London Bridge. But did they kill the man? Or did they birth a legend that would outlive his torment? Even as his body burned, his defiance endured. To the nobles and kings who cheered his execution, Wallace was a warning, but to the people, he became something else entirely. A whisper in the dark, a face carved in memory, songs written in blood, passed from mother to child. Centuries would pass, but his torment would not fade, it would ferment, becoming fuel for revolutions unborn. He had no crown, no castle, no royal name. But in the pain he bore, others found meaning, found courage. As empires rose and fell, the tale of William Wallace endured not just as a martyr's agony, but as a weapon, his suffering stapled into the very bones of Scotland's identity. The man was broken, dismembered, made dust. But even dust can carry fire, and sometimes it is not the sword, but the memory of the man who held it that topples kings. Wallace died screaming, but history still listens, and it remembers. And so, in back alleys and candlelit halls, his name was spoken like a prayer forged in agony. William Wallace, no longer just a man, but the echo of defiance carved into the scars of a nation. His death, brutal beyond imagining, was designed to crush resistance. Instead, it ignited it. Scotland did not forget. Neither did the world. Centuries later, his name still drips with blood and pride. In every tear that falls for freedom, in every fist raised against tyranny, his ghost lingers. Not in monuments, not in books, but in the spaces where people refuse to bow. Wallace never had a throne, yet he rules hearts. Never wore power, yet he commands it. His legacy is not a chapter in history, it is a pulse, throbbing through generations willing to die on their feet rather than live on their knees. Because in the end, you can kill the body, but you cannot kill memory. But history, like scars, never fades, it festers. In quiet libraries beneath layers of ink and dust, the truth still whispers that Wallace's execution was not the end, but a ripple one that reached far beyond Scotland's cragged hills. It echoed into the hearts of rebels across centuries, from the battlefields of Bannockburn to the speeches of men who would rise against tyranny in every age. His torment became proof that a single soul, ablaze with purpose, can collapse empires made of iron and fear. The wood that burned him ignited something the blade could not sever. A truth more terrifying than revolt, that when injustice dyes its hands in blood, the memory of the slain rises sharper than any sword. And even now, as darkness thickens in every corner of the world, the cry returns, a whisper, a raw freedom, not given, taken, written in pain, carved in flesh, and spoken forever in the name. Wallace. In the charred silence after Wallace's final breath, a question still burns: why must freedom be born in screams? Look deeper, and you'll find his story is not just Scotland's. It is every tale of the oppressed rising in defiance, every fist clenched against the cruelty of power. The chains they fastened to Wallace have long rusted, but new ones are forged every century. His agony, so vivid, so meticulously orchestrated, was the blueprint for how tyrants crush hope. Yet his name stands as the proof that such cruelty never truly succeeds. From Andes peaks to African plains, from whispered resistance under dictatorships to thunderous uprisings in the streets, his echo remains. They can break your bones, silence your mouth, erase your body, but they can never kill the will to resist. So when injustice breathes down your neck, know this: William Wallace screamed, not just for Scotland, he screamed for you. And history weeps, but it remembers. And yet, what did his execution truly accomplish? England paraded his severed limbs as a spectacle, a lesson in submission, but it didn't quiet the Highlands. Instead, it stirred something deeper. Because when a man dies with defiance on his tongue and fire in his eyes, the silence that follows is not peace, it is pressure, unseen, growing. In the decades that followed, his legacy fed the marrow of rebellion. Robert the Bruce, once Wallace's reluctant ally, would go on to lead Scotland to its own redemption at Bannockburn, not in Wallace's shadow, but because of it. And long after Wallace's voice was cut away, it kept speaking in code, in song, in stories whispered around firelight. So now ask yourself, not how did William Wallace die, but how did his death live on, in every heart that will not kneel, in every breath drawn beneath the weight of chains. Remember this: tyrants fear martyrs not for what they've done, but for what they become. History did not close the book on William Wallace, it redrew the lines because of him. His death, drenched in savagery, became more than a tale of suffering. It became a mirror for every age that followed. The scaffold where he screamed is gone, the blood rinsed away by time, yet his final breath still lingers in the bones of revolutions. You may never march into battle or face the lash of an empire, but one day you will stand at your own moment of defiance. And in that quiet stand, when your voice must rise against what is wrong, Wallace will be there not as a ghost, but as a lesson. That courage is eternal, even when bodies are not. This is no legend. This is loss made holy, blood turned into fire, and pain carved into purpose. He did not die quietly. He died so you would not have to, and that is why we remember. And yet, silence is what they feared most. Not Wallace's, but yours. The silence that forgets. The silence that allows tyranny to bloom unchallenged. Wallace's death was not meant to be remembered. It was crafted to terrify, to rub rebellion from the pages of history. But instead, it hardened the ink. And now, every time justice falters, his legacy breathes again. In every dictatorship challenged, in every wall defaced with protest, in every last breath cried out against cruelty, his execution replays not in chains and fire, but in courage. Because what Wallace endured was not an ending, it was an inheritance, passed to you, to me, to any soul who's ever looked at a throne and whispered, "No more. The man is gone, his bones scattered, but his story lives in the marrow of those who still dare to rise." And that is the cost and the promise of freedom, paid in one man's scream and echoed through all of ours. As long as breath dares to stand against silence, Wallace will remain. Not in statues that crumble or flags that fade, but in every refusal, every voice that says the powerful are not untouchable. His agony is not ancient, it's present, waiting in each heartbeat that flinches at injustice. They meant to bury him under fear, but instead they unearthed a force that time could not encase. He became the question no empire could answer. How do you kill a soul that refuses to kneel? And so his defiance marches on, barefoot through history, blood-streaked but unbroken. He teaches us that the flesh may fail, the body may burn, but dignity carved in resistance is immortal. In every midnight act of courage, in every whisper turned to a roar, Wallace rises anew, not to haunt, but to remind. The chains they forged were heavy, but his scream was heavier, and it still shakes the walls. So when you step into silence, into moments where truth feels smothered and power looms like a shadow, remember this: Wallace faced the unthinkable and roared, not to be heard once, but to echo endlessly. His scream is stitched into the walls of history, into every defiant heart that refuses to bow no matter the cost. That execution, soaked in blood and spectacle, was supposed to silence him forever. Instead, it gave his defiance 1,000 voices. Yours could be one of them. You don't need a sword to resist, just the courage to speak. Wallace's agony was a spark, his name a flame, and now, in the quiet spaces of the world where darkness gathers and the brave must rise, his fire waits, still lit, still burning, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a call. Will you answer it, or will silence win at last? The fire waits, but not forever. One day it dims, drowns beneath forgetfulness, until someone dares to strike flint against bone again. That someone could be you, in quiet resistance, in truth spoken when a lie is easier. Wallace's scream was not an ending cry, it was a question. Not, will you fight, but, how long will you wait? He reminds us that tyranny doesn't arrive with thunder, it seeps in through silence. His dismembered body became a map leading not to war, but to awareness, to vigilance. His death demanded that we never look away again, so let them call him traitor, savage, rebel. History gave him another title, immortal, not in flesh, but in flame. As long as there are voices that rise, knees that refuse to bend, fires that refuse to die, William Wallace lives. His agony was the price. Our memory is the promise. And now, the silence asks, will you carry it? This is where Wallace's tale truly ends, not in the blaze of battle, but in the quiet choice to never forget. His body was torn, his name almost buried, but remembrance became a rebellion of its own. Every time a teacher whispers his story, every artist sketches his face in ash, every child learns that one man once stood alone and refused to fall, a chain is broken. So let them erase walls, rewrite books, silence cries. Memory has teeth, and William Wallace is its bite. Because the most brutal execution in medieval history didn't end a life. It forged a lineage of defiance, passed down not by blood, but by courage. As long as one heart resists, as long as one truth refuses to burn, the man who died screaming with fire in his soul does not rest. He rises, in you, in all of us, and through us, he wins. And so this story closes not with silence, but with a pulse steady, eternal, defiant. William Wallace, a man born of soil and sorrow, became something more than myth. He became the scream behind every locked door, the fire beneath every shackle. The brutality of his death was meant to erase him from time, but it did the opposite. It burned his soul into the sky. That sky still watches, from battlefields to picket lines, from prison walls to parliamentary chambers. His spirit stands where justice wavers. The executioner's blade fell, but it failed. Wallace bleeds through centuries like ink through parchment, staining every age with the haunting question, what will you do with your freedom? You've heard his story. Now carry it, not in flags or words, but in action, in courage. Never kneel, never forget. For in that unbreakable memory, William Wallace does not just survive, he triumphs. And perhaps that is all history ever truly is, not ink and dates, not kings and crowns, but the chorus of voices that refuse to disappear. Wallace's scream is not trapped in time. It lives in every heartbeat that quickens at injustice. His agony is not a relic, it is a warning etched into every struggle, every stand, every soul that sees the weight of power and says no. His death asks not for grief, but for vigilance, because tyranny is patient. It waits in silence, watches through indifference. His story is not meant to haunt, but to awaken, not to glorify pain, but to demand purpose. So when the chains rattle again, when fear whispers louder than truth, remember the man who died not for glory, but for the chance that we might rise. Remember Wallace not as a fallen hero, but as the voice that still speaks when the world forgets to listen. So when the future looks back, and the dust of time settles over forgotten names and buried crowns, they will find one man still standing silent, but not gone. William Wallace, torn limb from limb, remains whole where it matters most, in the conscience of a world forever at war with itself. His was not the tale of a hero fashioned by victories, but of a soul tempered by torment. And through every age that seeks to silence, dissent, or crush resistance, his story will rise again, not as a war cry, but as a warning. That pain endured with purpose cannot be erased, that the human spirit, when lit by truth, defies even death. And so he lingers, not to inspire, but to ignite. Wallace is not history, he is prophecy, a reminder that even in the blackest hour, one voice, one soul burning brighter than fear, can change everything. His scream still echoes, and now it is yours. And if you carry that echo, if you choose to hear it, not merely as history, but as a heartbeat, the legacy does not end here. It begins again, in every injustice faced today, from the quiet corridors where the voiceless are dismissed, to the open streets where the brave are silenced. Wallace's ghost walks beside you, not to guide, but to witness, to see if his suffering meant something, whether the fire he lit was just a flicker, or a blaze that still burns in the hearts of those who will not yield. Because the question he died asking remains unanswered. Will you surrender to silence, or will you rise with the weight of every scream that came before you? You've now heard the most brutal execution in medieval history, but brutality was not the end. Defiance was. Wallace's death tore him apart, but it left one thing untouched: the truth that fear dies loudest when it tries to kill the free. And that truth is now yours to carry. So let this be the final breath of a story, not buried, but blazing. Let Wallace's scream live not only in our history, but in our habits, in every no whispered in defiance, in every injustice called by name. His torment was crafted to unmake him, to twist courage into silence. Instead, It built a monument not of stone, but of memory sharpened by pain. And what remains is not a tale of mercy, but of meaning. Let tyrants tremble not at swords, but at the truths they cannot silence. Let courage rise not in the noise of war, but in the still, resolute hearts who bear the legacy forward. This is not about remembering the man alone, but honoring the choice he made to scream into the dark, so others would not walk it alone. So now the pages close not on an execution, but on an inheritance. Wallace does not rest. He waits for you. His story is over, but its embers still burn beneath the surface of our world. The man is ash, the legend alive, and the scream he left behind is not fading, it is multiplying. For every cruel ruler, every silenced protest, every moment when justice teeters and truth trembles, Wallace stands at the edge of memory, daring us to move. We do not honor him with statues, we honor him with courage. With the quiet, relentless act of not looking away, his execution was meant to erase him, but it marked the world forever. In the blood-soaked theater of medieval cruelty, they thought they had ended him. But you've heard the truth. Wallace did not die in 1305. He transformed into every soul that won't be broken, into the fire behind a whisper that dares to say, no more. And now, centuries later, the final question is not who William Wallace was, but who we choose to be because of him. And so we end not with silence, but with a choice. The chains that tore Wallace's flesh belong to a past drenched in cruelty, but the chains we face today are woven from silence, fear, and the slow erosion of courage. His agony gave voice to every oppressed generation, and now that voice calls again, not to mourn, but to move, not to echo, but to act. The brutality meant to end him gave birth to a legacy of resistance no blade could sever. Wallace's final scream did not vanish into history. It fused with every cry for freedom yet to come. Let this be the moment where history becomes present, where remembrance turns into resolve, where one soul dared to scream, yet millions remember. William Wallace is not gone, not truly. He lives in every stand taken, every silence shattered. His end was unspeakable, but what came after, that is up to us, that is up to you. So the execution ends, the crowd disperses, and the scaffold stands empty, but something greater begins. A ripple sent through time, carried not by blood, but by memory. Wallace's scream was the thunderclap that split centuries open, demanding we listen not just with ears, but with conviction. His suffering became scripture for the daring, a sacred text, not written in ink, but in fire and flesh. And now, with every injustice that gnaws at the bones of humanity, his legacy returns not to haunt, but to challenge. What will you do when your own hour of truth arrives? When silence presses in, and courage is all you have left? History does not demand heroes, it demands witnesses who become warriors. William Wallace was one, and because of him, we might remember that even the most brutal death can give life to imperishable resistance. So when history asks again, not who he was, but who you are, answer loudly, answer bravely, for freedom, for memory, for Wallace. This is the last breath of a man who never truly died. William Wallace was torn apart to terrify, to silence, but to those willing to feel instead of forget, he became something elemental, a force. His body was broken in ways too cruel to speak, yet history speaks anyway, because silence was never an option. The brutality was real, unbearable, unforgettable, but it birthed something stronger than any sword, remembrance with purpose. It asks nothing spectacular from us, only that we carry even a flicker of his fire, that we refuse to kneel, that we speak when silence swallows others. So let this be the final scar etched in time, not his execution, but our obligation. His story was not about dying for freedom, it was about daring to live as if it mattered. And now, centuries later, his voice comes through you, not in shouts, in choices, in courage. William Wallace is not waiting anymore. He walks beside you. And perhaps that is the only immortality worth having, not carved in monuments, not sung in hollow oaths, but living on in the cracks of history where truth refuses to die. Wallace never asked to be eternal. He did not fight for legacy. He fought because chains were closing, breath by breath, around a people suffocating on obedience. His scream tore through time not to echo but to endure. If we still hear it, it's because we need to. If we still feel it, it's because somewhere injustice still stands at the gate. Let his name remind us that the greatest battles are not fought with armies, but with memory that burns through erasure. William Wallace was broken by cruelty, but rebuilt by remembrance. And now, as the final echo fades, one truth remains. He was silenced in body, never in spirit. Because in the darkest parts of the world, where oppression takes root, his scream still answers with flame, forever. And now, as this final echo falls quiet, one truth burns brighter than all the rest, that Wallace's scream belongs to no time, no country, no single cause. It is human, it is universal. It is the heartbeat beneath every injustice faced, every right withheld, every truth forced into shadows. You have not just heard a story, you've inhaled a memory shaped in fire. The most brutal execution in medieval history did not bury him, it unearthed us, revealed who we are when stripped of comfort, when faced with cruelty, and in that unveiling we find purpose, not wrath, not vengeance, but resolve. Wallace was not just a man undone by empire, he was a mirror, and what you choose to do with his reflection is the closing verse of a song still being sung. So let the world grow dark, let silence come, but not in you, not now, because where his scream ends, yours must begin. So as his scream becomes yours, make it count not in echoes, but in action. Let it guide your hands when they tremble, steady your voice when it threatens to fail. The execution was meant to crush a man, erase a spirit, but instead it inscribed a legacy into the marrow of generations. History may call it the most brutal ending of a man, but that is only half the truth. The other half lives in the moments we defy, in the silences we break, in the courage we summon when we're most afraid. This isn't just his story anymore, it's ours, and as the final image fades the chains, the blood, the fire, let one thing remain, not the suffering, not the pain, but the will to rise, over and over again. When power says stay down, the scaffold is gone. But what it birthed is immortal, not just William Wallace, but the unyielding fire he passed on, now lit in you. So let the embers glow, quiet but unyielding. For though the execution ended centuries ago, its echo threads through every act of resistance born from pain. William Wallace died in a world that believed brutality could bury truth. But truth, like fire, finds oxygen in memory. His agony lit the fuse of countless battles yet to come, not with armies or banners, but with the raw defiance of spirit. That's his true legacy. Not just the scream itself, but what followed after, the choices made under shadow, the stands taken in silence. When fear tightens its grip and history dares to repeat itself, remember the man who did not die begging but roaring. Let his scream remain more than a sound. Let it be the voice behind yours, the fire behind your fight, the reason why no one stands alone in the dark. Wallace may be gone in body, but in courage, he was only ever the beginning. So, light it. The fire he left, flickering in history's coldest corners. Let it burn not to destroy, but to illuminate every injustice that hides in silence, every truth the world dares not speak. William Wallace did not fall in vain, he rose in us. In every act of defiance taken not for glory, but for dignity. The scaffold that tore his body did not erase his message, it carved it deeper. His was a death meant to break hope, but instead it gave it teeth. So stand, not because freedom is easy, but because it matters more than comfort. Speak, not because you are fearless, but because fear is where courage begins. The execution is over, but remember, the most brutal end in medieval history did not finish a man. It forged a movement, and movements, like fire, cannot be chained. William Wallace is gone, but in your breath, your will, your refusal, he lives on, and now so does his scream. So carry it, not like a burden but like a torch, lit from pain, fueled by memory, passed from scream to scream. Wallace's soul did not scatter with the wind on that scaffold, it settled deep, inside every soul that cannot abide chains. That execution was no end. It was a challenge carved in agony, daring us to never surrender what it means to be free. In the quiet moments when justice trembles, listen not for voices of kings, but for that one ragged breath that refused to break. Wallace is not a statue. He is not folklore. He is the scream that survives the silence. And now, with the flame in your hands, the only question left is simple. Will you let it die? Or will you carry it forward, through shadow, through fear, through fire, until the world finally hears what one man, ripped apart yet unbroken, roared into the void? Freedom, taken, not begged, and never, ever forgotten. This is where the fire ends, but only if we let it. William Wallace's scream was not made to echo eternally without purpose. It was meant to be heard once, then lived forever. In our choices, in our stands, in every moment where freedom trembles and waits for someone, anyone, to rise. They broke his body to bury the idea of resistance, but that idea rose stronger than ever. It marched through centuries, shaping hearts that beat louder than fear. And now, the last ember of his agony flickers in your hands. Hold it close. Let it remind you that even in the face of unbearable cruelty, one act of defiance can ripple through time. Wallace did not win a war. He won something greater, a defiance that cannot die. So let this be our promise to him. We will carry it. We will light the dark. And no matter how loud the silence becomes, his scream, our scream, will answer. Always,